Hi, I'm Traven. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll be looking at everything I read for the month of August. So we'll be maintaining the same division that I established in the previous overview video. I'll go through the novels first and then talk about the graphic novels and comic books, although for this month that category will be much quicker to go through for reasons that will be made clear very shortly. So starting with my lowest reads for this month as far as novels are concerned, I had one 2-star read this month, and that was Gone to See the Riverman by Christopher Triana. So this book was part of the Magical Readathon, and the category that this was fulfilling, or the prompt that this was fulfilling, was a book that was the first thing you saw when you went onto Instagram. And so the first thing I saw when I went on Instagram was Down the River of Blood, I believe is the title of the sequel book for this. And so I decided to pick this up. I had heard about this from a few of the horror content creators that I follow, and so I decided to pick it up and give it a shot. And unfortunately, this was just not for me. The positive thing about having read through this is it stands in for a genre known as extreme horror, and I now know for sure that that is not a genre for me. The book largely relies on over-the-top descriptions of gore, violence, depraved characters, very uncomfortable situations and settings. There are times when that could work, but the book almost seems to revel in it, which I did not appreciate. And also, from a storytelling perspective, our main character does not change from the beginning of the book to the end of the book in any meaningful way. Arguably, you could say that she finds out that she is a horrible person, but it's pretty clear from about a quarter of the way through what kind of individual she is from the reader's perspective, and so you're just waiting the rest of the book for her to kind of catch up. The entire time I was hoping for a different conclusion to the story. I do think that that played a large role in this getting the 2-star rating that it ended up at. Had it had a slightly different ending, one with a little bit more character growth or change, then it might have gotten a 3-star, but it really was unappealing on a number of levels, and I finished it up mostly because it was part of the readathon. I will not be picking up another book from this author again. I probably will not pick up another book in this genre. It's just not my thing. It's just not something I want to take part, to read again. It was not interesting to me. Moving on to 3-star reads. So we have one 3-star read for this month from the novel section, and that is The House Witch by Delimhawk. I believe that's how to pronounce that name. This one was one I was really looking forward to, and it's unfortunate that it wound up where it did, because it's largely a product of the self-publishing feel to the book. Like, the book is self-published, and I think it would have gone a long way to have an editor go over this, to get some of the major issues that the book has under control. There's a good amount of infantile humor that just did not land for me, and there was a number of perspective shifts that were distracting. It would go from the main character's perspective, then jump into the other character's perspective, and then back and forth throughout the scene. And there's nothing really wrong with that, but it was problematic in that the character would be concerned about how the other person was reacting, and from a limited point of view, you would at least, as a reader, be in the same situation where you're like, I don't know if this is working out. I don't know how this person is reacting to it. But then it would jump to the other character's perspective and it would completely just answer that question for you, how the other person was reacting to what the first person was saying. There was no sense of any kind of like tension or build up of emotion, which hurt the central romance plot. But I still think there's some good in the book. I think if it was pared down a little bit, get rid of the potty humor kind of chapters and those parts of the book, stress more the relationship between the two romantic leads, and do away with the very weird cat perspective chapters, I think that this would have been a much higher rating from me. It does seem to want to fill that cozy fantasy story genre, but unfortunately, because of those distracting issues and because of its focus on like a larger, very serious plot working in the background, both of those things worked against that feeling, and it ultimately came out kind of muddled. So that's why it ended up as a 3. Before we get to the physical books for the 4-star ratings, there were 2 audiobooks that both got 4 stars. The first was Shirley Jackson's The Haunting of Hill House, which I felt like was a really good exploration and a psychological thriller, gothic horror, and one of the earlier examples of that. It's kind of held up as a classic. And so I did really enjoy that one. Ended up as 4 stars, mostly due to the tropes that have now kind of firmly established themselves in those genres just kind of falling flat. Like, I should give some credence to the idea that it's probably creating some of those, but the idea that these characters had these obviously very scary, very visceral encounters with ghosts, and then later were justifying it to themselves in their mind, and just the subtle nature, the change in the main character over time, that was very interesting. But it was good. It was solid, and so I ended up at a 4-star with that one. The other 4-star audiobook was Victor LaValle's The Ballad of Black Tom. This was a Cthulhu mythos story set in like the Jazz Age, and starring an African-American man who initially starts off knowing about magic and trying to thwart these magical plans, and then gets gradually more and more involved in it. It was only, I think, a 3-hour read on the audiobook, so it's a very short read. I would highly recommend it, especially if you're a fan of any of the Cthulhu mythos. And again, that setting was just very interesting to me, and something that I felt was fresh, something that I hadn't experienced before. So that one also ended up at 4 stars. Last one for 4-star reads for the novels is Gabby Burton's Sing Me to Sleep. This was actually my first Fairy Loot box. It is a story about a siren who is now having to be kind of a double agent. She really hates the royalty and the way that they treat her kind, but she is getting closer to the prince, and then she starts falling in love with him, of course. The interesting thing about this story is that the protagonist is compelled to kill whenever she is around water, and a lot of the internal conflict within the story deals with her struggling with being a monster. And is she really monstrous? Is she someone who is trying to do bad things for a good reason? I found all that very interesting. However, I felt like they did too good of a job making her a morally gray character, to the point where it's hard to root for her in the end, because she has done objectively terrible things for really poor reasons. And so it's the struggle I had with this, the reason why I didn't get up to a 5-star read, I feel like there is still too much of a push to make her into a heroic character at the end and into a hero, and not kind of embrace that idea that we've been following a villain character. I feel like that's a little bit too difficult, a little too nuanced for the kind of writing, the age group that this is going for. So up until the end, I felt like it was very compelling, but just having to ride that line and not quite sure where to land as far as the morality of our protagonist made it a 4-star rather than a 5. So now getting to the 5-star reads for this month. Oh, I guess I should say, while I'm thinking about it, so Sing Me to Sleep was for the readathon, a character with a superpower, some sort of magical power, and then The House Witch was a story that dealt with royalty or with court intrigue. So those were also for the readathon. Most of my reads for this month were. And to that point, we have Blue Remembered Earth, a book with Earth in the title, and that was the prompt for this particular read. Now, this is something that has been on my shelf for a while now. I feel like it's been a few years. I've read the sequel to this, On the Steel Breeze, and I was a little hesitant to pick it up for this readathon because I know that Alastair Reynolds, especially with his novels, is very difficult for me to get through. The kind of hard sci-fi stories tend to be ones that, while I feel like they're very well written and very intriguing, I like reading them, they are also the ones that slow down my reading rate by a considerable degree, and this was no exception. I did my best to finish this in a timely manner, and I alternated between reading the book and listening to the audiobook so that I could fill as much time with getting through this, and it still took a number of days to finish this one up. I will say, like, as a prequel, I don't think it as a story that came before another one in the series, I don't think it suffered too much from having me read the sequel first. I was aware of some of the characters in here and some of the names. Like, I knew who were the important family, and I knew a bit about their relationships with one another. And it was still setting up some of the stuff that paid off in the second book, but it was still a good read. It was still interesting. I didn't know where the story was going to head necessarily by having read the sequel book. And it's one that gets 5 stars because the world is so well fleshed out. Alastair Reynolds has a very good talent for world building in these sci-fi settings and acclimating you to the world without being overly obtuse. The story was compelling. It's another one of these that's a little bit of a mystery as you're going through, with a couple of the events that happen and trying to figure out like what was really going on in this person's life that they're now investigating. The same was true for the sequel book. There was a bit of a mystery there as well. I do feel like I enjoyed On the Steel Breeze a little bit more, only because I really liked the idea of the 3 protagonists in that book being connected and having their memories uploaded occasionally and kind of living 3 lives simultaneously, and the exploration of self and of like what your history means to you in that one. This one did not have that. I felt like the main character was fine, but what really drove the story for me was the world and the plot. Would highly recommend if you're a sci-fi fan, especially if you've read other works from Alastair Reynolds. I think this is a really strong read. Next up in 5-star reads is Come Closer, which is like Gone to See the Riverman is more of a novella. I think it's only a little over 100 pages maybe. Finished it in a day and really enjoyed this one. Now, it's going to be complicated talking about this one, which I rated a 5-star, and Gone to See the Riverman, which was a 2-star, in the fact that this is also a story that is about a person who ends up doing very morally questionable things, ends up being a rather terrible individual, but the perspective that we have here is one of a character gradually losing their sense of self, gradually being overcome by a demon. So this book for the readathon for me was fulfilling the prompt of allowing your Instagram followers to choose which book, to vote on which book you'd read. And I chose 2 books that had a demon theme because I was trying to kind of keep that consistent across as many books as I could in the readathon, since it dealt with my character's backstory, and I wanted to have that thematic tie-in. So the story here is one of a woman who is gradually being overtaken by a demon, and it's at times very funny and at times incredibly uncomfortable and sad. It never raises to the heights of kind of the exploitative level of Gone to See the Riverman, and up until the very end, it is like a battle against the true person that Amanda is and the demon that's possessing her. So I don't think it's trying to be as bleak, as intentionally bleak as Gone to See the Riverman was. I do think it is trying to argue, for the resistance to these things and show that the actions that she does are terrible and deplorable. And there is a change in the character. It is kind of a change for the worse, but it's also kind of a tragic story because it is something that is completely out of her control. So that the interesting concept mixed with the relatively short reading time is what gave this a 5-star. So it was a quick read and something that I felt was really compelling. And like I said, at times funny, at times very sad. It had a lot of emotional range in this one for such a short read. I'd highly recommend this one. Next up in 5-star reads is Only a Monster by Vanessa Lynn. So this one is one that, again, I mostly listened to in audiobook form because it was an easier way with work starting up again to get through the book. It's one that is another one of these YA stories, romance subplot in it. This one is about a girl who finds out that her family is monsters. They're a group of monsters. There's a whole monster society that she's unaware of. They can travel through time, and there is a hero that is going around and killing them and messing up the timeline. Like, no one has seen this coming, and there are several characters in here that their whole idea is that they know what's going to happen. So an interesting plot, feels kind of like a isekai kind of thing where she's dropped into this new world, fish out of water. But what I liked about this was the character you're following has several character traits that I found very interesting and compelling, especially given the framework of the story. So she's very much interested in history. She's half human, which they make a big deal about, and she has not known about her monster heritage this whole time. But that pull to history, that pull to the past, is part of that as well. And the end especially, I kind of knew where it was going because I had read the synopsis for the sequel book, but the way in which it was delivered was one that was genuinely surprising to me, given everything that had happened up to that point. And so, yeah, it was just a fun adventure story. And because of that ending, that managed to surprise me despite me knowing what was going to happen. This ended up as a 5-star. I'd highly recommend it if you are a fan of like YA fantasy with these kind of these rather straightforward adventure type plots. It hit a lot of the tropes and a lot of the plot lines that I enjoy reading, and so it ended up as a 5-star. This book, by the way, was for the readathon, a book with a black cover. So that's what this one was fulfilling. And finally, for 5-star reads, the last novel for this month was Guardians of the Dawn Zhara. This has been described as the Lunar Chronicles with a more like Asian theme, a more like anime style, maybe influenced storyline. And I will be doing a more dedicated review of this because it is the Barnes & Noble YA Book Club book for this month, and that is something that I have been collecting and want to do dedicated reviews for. And but I will say that of all the stories that I've read, all the YA fantasy that I read for this month, that are clear setups for a sequel or a trilogy, this did the best job in clearly setting up the expanded world in which the story is going to evolve to accommodate and evolve to explore. So a number of these stories are going to end up with a sequel book, possibly a trilogy, but they don't really start off with a clear sense of the wider world and how it is going to continue to move forward in future installments. But I feel like this book did. I feel like this book very clearly sets up how we can move the story forward, what ideas we could explore in the future, and where the story might head from this point. And so again, because it was another one of the very comfortable YA fantasy stories, very reminiscent of Lunar Chronicles, and for the fact that it had that built-in larger plot moving forward, I'm very much interested in picking up a sequel book. This just came out this month, so it'll be a while, but I am very much looking forward to it, very excited about it. And so this one ended up as a 5-star, and I will come back at some point with a more dedicated review for this book. Moving on to comics, this will be a quicker one from previous months. So we have one 4-star read in Constantine Distorted Illusions. Is like a one and done DC story. They've been putting out a number of these. There's a Zatanna one. I've read one on Whistle, which is a very interesting character. I read one on Victor and Nora, which was like a Mr. Freeze backstory one. They've got one on Catwoman and Green Lantern. So they're just coming out with a number of these like one-shot graphic novels that you can pick up and read, get a full story. And this one focused on Constantine. It was very much kind of a by-the-numbers Constantine story. What kind of keeps this from being a 5-star read is it does have the very problematic and rather played out trope of the girl who thinks that she can fix Constantine and that she's going to change him. And it was just kind of a tired thing that I've seen a number of times with this character in particular and with characters like him in general. And so that part did not work for me. But this has a demon possession story. Like I said, I tried to keep that as a theme for a number of my reads for this month. I found that very interesting. It had a number of minor characters from the DC universe, magical users who don't get a lot of screen time, coming in at the end to all work together to help Constantine clean up his mess. And it did have some character growth. Like, it suggests that Constantine is doing better at the end than he was at the start of the book. And so it does build up to something new and something interesting. But yeah, because of the that one aspect of the love story between the two of them and it just not working for me, that is the reason why this did not get a 5-star. Last thing is One Piece. So if you watched my video for TBR for August, you would know that it was my goal to read a volume of One Piece every day that month to try to get up to what I currently have released, which is, or get close to current releasing, which is about volume 103. So starting at, what did I start with this month? I started at, these are later ones. Yeah, so starting at volume 62, actually I think I started with 61. So I was partway through 61. So starting there, I read through volume 62 through I think 82. And so I'm just gonna throw up a bunch of these comics as I read through and talk through it. So I was reading one of these a day. I got up to about the 20th day, and just the combination of reading this and reading for the readathon was a little bit too much. Again, this is something that I'm probably going to do a more dedicated review on, but just as kind of an overall synopsis, I did get through the Return to Shabadi arc. I got through Fishman Island. I got through Punk Hazard and Dressrosa, and now I'm on Zoe. Dressrosa, Zoe, and Whole Cake Island, which is the next arc, are probably some of my favorites from the New World arcs. I felt like Fishman Island was kind of a disappointment going back and reading through it. I'm sure it has its defenders, and it certainly does serve an important function within the larger story of One Piece, which I would go into in a more dedicated review. But I feel like the villains were a little bit too goofy, a little bit too underpowered. There were very few stakes, and the best thing to come out of the Fishman Island arc really was just the declaration against Big Mom and establishing Luffy as a force for the New World. I felt like Punk Hazard was very good, again, further opening up the world building. And then Dressrosa just has so many iconic moments and so many very important things happening for a number of the principal characters that it really was exciting to go back and read it, even though it is such a very lengthy arc. I think I enjoyed it a little bit more this time around because I feel like the last time I was reading through One Piece was when Dressrosa was still being released. And so it is a very long arc, it's a very involved arc, and so it felt like it dragged even worse the last time because I was having to wait for the next volume to come out, and I wasn't able to, just read it all in one go. Reading it all together was, I think, a lot better of an option and helped the story flow a little bit better and see the connections between the different things going on, not really losing track of the characters and all the events that are happening, which is good because that arc is incredibly complicated. There are a number of things going on. Now, again, we're in Zoe. We're just about to start Whole Cake Island, I feel. I'm on volume 82. I'll be reading it sporadically through the next month. All the volumes got 4 or 5 stars. When it's going through Fishman Island, even the ones I think are not very compelling arcs with very little for me to grab onto, I'm still giving it 4 stars. One Piece is amazing. It's probably my favorite piece of fiction in general, like not just manga, just in general, all fiction. And so, like I said, I'll probably do a more dedicated review specifically for One Piece, and in particular the things that happen after the time skip and into New World, because there are a number of things I can talk about as far as expanding the world building and characterization, and it's just not enough. It's just too much for an overview video. But yeah, that's another 20 volumes or so, or 20 books or so that I got through. And thank you for joining me on this look at everything that I read for the month of August. If you would like to know more about any of the titles that I looked at today, if you'd like to see a dedicated review to something, please let me know, and I can certainly take that feedback into consideration when I'm looking at creating new videos. I hope your reading journey is going well. Thank you for continuing to help build our corner of the BookTube community, and until the next one, I hope you guys have a great day.